Good afternoon. I'm Nathan W. Bingham, Ligonier's Senior Manager of Communications, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for our live interview on productivity and leadership. We have two guests with us this afternoon. The first is possibly one of the most widely read Christian bloggers. He's a Canadian friend of the ministry here at Ligonier. He's a pastor and an author. Of course, I'm speaking of Tim Challies. Tim, thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Sure, thanks for having me.
And we're also joined by Ligonier's CEO and President, Chris Larson. Chris, thank you for being with us as well.
Good to be with you, friends.
Well, I want to dig straight in to the subject of productivity. If you look at blog headlines and online magazine article titles, you're going to see tips and tricks and stuff like that related to productivity. It almost seems as if the world is obsessed with it. Tim, what is with this current sort of fad about productivity? And of course, you've written a book on the subject, so maybe you could tell us the story too about what led to you penning that book.
Yeah, I think the obsession with productivity comes out of some of the new realities in our world that a lot of people are in a different kind of work now than they were 20, 50, or 100 years ago. So you go back in time, and most people had clearly defined jobs to do. You might have been working in a factory, you might have been a farmer, and productivity, in your view, is pretty straightforward. There wasn't a lot to it. We're in this new economy now where many people like yourselves and myself, we're sitting at a desk and we can go in many different directions over the course of a day. We have many different challenges. We're always making these decisions about where will I invest my time? Where will I invest my energy? And I really think a lot of the productivity talk has come out of that. And then the resurgence over the last few years, I think, has been a response to the amount of distraction we have in our lives. We're realizing that productivity is very, very difficult in an always-on world, surrounded by devices, all of which are beeping and buzzing and vibrating and squawking and constantly pulling us away from one thing and toward another. And so we're left in this world of, I have a lot to do. I can choose from many different things. I find myself doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that, or sometimes nothing at all. And my desire to write about productivity really flowed out of my own desire to make the best use of my time. I became aware that I was frittering away a lot of time, and more aware that God was calling me, as he calls all of us, to use our time well, to redeem the time. And so I went looking for solutions. First, what does it mean to be productive? What does it mean to be productive in a distinctly Christian way? And then second, how can I structure my life to actually live that way?
Yeah, can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
One of the things, Tim, that I appreciate in what you've tried to do in bringing Christians' focus on this is that you're grounding it in an explicitly biblical theological worldview that draws a lot of strength out of the Reformation. And the Reformation bequeathed an entire vocational ethic that I hear coming through everything that you're writing. What were the streams that kind of fed into your thinking, if we're doing all things to the glory of God?
Yeah, well, you definitely hear about the Protestant work ethic, right? So there is something in Protestantism that drives us to be hard workers and to accomplish the highest purposes. And having been raised in a Presbyterian tradition and raised around the catechisms, I was very much aware that we exist to glorify God, that we are to glorify God and enjoy him forever. And so really at the basis of what I was writing was this idea that we need to be glorifying God in all that we do. And so in some way, our productivity, the way we live out our workaday lives, that must relate back to that great goal of bringing glory to God. And so I drew from there and thought, okay, so we have to glorify God. We glorify God by doing good for others. And specifically, how we glorify God is by living for the good of others and expressing love to others through what we do. And so I took those two things and started to work towards a definition of productivity and then certain habits of productivity.
That's beautiful.
So Chris, how should we as Christians think not even just about productivity, but about work in general?
I just want to stay with this theme of doing all things to the glory of God. I think we have to recognize our own creatureliness when it comes to the subject of work, and productivity is one of those essential aspects to work. We understand that there are fruitful stewards, and then there are unfruitful stewards, disobedient servants. We have to understand God is the creator, and he's been at work since the beginning. Jesus even says, my Father has been at work and I am at work. And so what does that mean? You have to go back to Genesis, and God is the one who is taking action first. He is the initiator. And any theology of work has to derive its source in understanding that the Lord is working, and he blesses work, and he calls it good. And so there has to be something in work that is part of who we were intended to be as creatures in following after the Creator. We trust that he has given us guidelines, principles, understanding, and we see it coming up again and again throughout the scriptures. We see Adam and Eve being given a mandate to tend, to keep, to take dominion over the whole of creation. And this is all before the fall. And so there is a blessing upon labor. It was after the fall that labor was frustrated, that Adam's work would be filled with thorns and unfruitful ground. And so we understand the things that come up in terms of being productive workers that I think Tim is addressing and has addressed well in his book. I think that's just one of those effects of the fall that we're now having to think more keenly about how to avoid distraction, how to rightly order our time. And that certainly brings into view the right use of tools and techniques. And there's a lot that we can learn from a lot of different streams, but we understand that we go to work for the same reason we go to church, to worship Jesus Christ.
Well, Tim, this definition that you've hinted at of productivity goes right at the heart of trying to do all things to the glory of God. Perhaps you could share with us, what is that definition that you outline in your book?
Yeah, so as I wrap my mind around productivity, looking especially to the Bible to see what it says about what we're to do in this life and how and why we're to do it, I arrived at a definition like this, that productivity is effectively stewarding your gifts, talents, time, energy, and enthusiasm for the good of others and the glory of God. And so it's effectively stewarding these things, which means I don't own anything in this world. God just gives me gifts. He gives me talents. He gives me time. I need to treat all those as a faithful steward, not an owner. And then I'm to steward my gifts. So spiritual gifting, when we become believers, God gifts us in certain ways to serve others, especially to serve believers. My talents, just natural talent, the things I've always been good at, just again, a gift of God. My time, God gives me time, and I'm responsible to make the most of it. My energy, by which I really mean just that ebb and flow we all have through our day and through our week. When I'm properly stewarding my energy, I know where I'm at my best and where I can do my best work. I know where I'm not at my best, so maybe have to do kind of works that don't engage my full mind in the same way. It also calls me to make sure I'm taking time. If the Lord took a day out of 7 to rest, then I better take one as well. And then my enthusiasm, just those things that I'm energetic, I'm enthusiastic about. And God makes us all enthusiastic about different things. So I think we can see that some of these are God's gifts, and I can pursue some of that enthusiasm. And all of this I'm doing for the good of others and for the glory of God.
So when we think about productivity, you're saying the end goal is for the good of others and for the glory of God. How are we trying to calculate what sort of success looks like from a productivity perspective? Is it just trying to get the most done in the least amount of time?
Yeah, no, and that's one of the big fables about productivity, that productivity means getting more stuff done. But the much higher definition of productivity is getting the right stuff done. So finding out what it is that I'm responsible to do before the Lord, and then to succeed at those things. And probably that means I need to stop doing a lot of things. A lot of us are doing things that we should not be doing. They're outside of our core mission, and we're filling up our lives with things that are actually just big distractions. So if a man, what does it gain a man if he gains the world and loses his soul? What does it gain me if I accomplish all sorts of things, but all the while I've neglected the matters of first importance? I've neglected family. I've neglected church. And so productivity is definitely finding my core things, the things that God has made me most responsible for, the things he's made me uniquely responsible for, and making sure that I'm giving the best of my time, the best of my energy, the best of my enthusiasm to those few things.
There's a clear emphasis there in Matthew 7, right? When Jesus is telling us the story of those workers who were productive doing many things in his name, but they didn't know the Lord.
Right.
So there is a way to be productive in all the wrong directions. And first of all, we have to ground who we are in our identity, in our union with Christ, and understanding that he's at work in this world. And how would he have me to steward the 24 hours a day, 7 days a week that he's given me while I still have breath? And you see that refrain come up in the Psalms, that the psalmist is asking, Lord, I want to praise you. I want to do what you've called me to do while I have breath. There's coming a moment where our life and our time will end, and we will be called to give an account. But if our relationship with Christ is not genuine, and we are understanding who we are in relation to our union with Christ and his saving work in our lives, really all of our labor can be for naught. This isn't to shortchange other interesting discussions about common grace pursuits and ways that the rain falls on the just and the unjust, and we can talk about the merits of that terminology, but we understand that we're talking about a distinctly Christian view of productivity and work.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like what you said earlier, just about the dignity that the Bible brings to our work. We of all people can look to God's word and say, God created us to work. So there is inherent dignity in this. And then we can also look to the fall to see why it's so hard, right? It wasn't, so work pre-existed the fall, but it was in the fall that the thorns and thistles started to choke out Adam's crop. So Adam the farmer in the perfect world was now Adam the farmer who would fight against those thorns and thistles. And no matter what work we're involved in today, we have those thorns and the thistles. And for a lot of us, those thorns and thistles today are Facebook notifications or things of that nature. They're just these distractions that we have to find ways of dealing with, or they're things that can lead us away from our main calling. So we have to expect that work will be difficult because we live in a sinful world that's opposed to God and opposed to his ways.
I like one of the things that you highlight in terms of doing things, obviously for the glory of God, but for the good of others. And this question comes up often in my own thinking about what does it look like to develop a particular culture in a workplace. And if you are grounding love for neighbor, if you're making all of your considerations of activities grounded in a love for neighbor, there are some natural good effects that flow from that, in terms of the way that you respect others' time, the way that you would organize meetings, the way that you would try and streamline discussions so that there's clear action steps to be taken, so that at the end of a 45-minute or an hour meeting, everybody's sitting in the room kind of wondering, okay, now what do we do? Are we just going to have another meeting in another week? And sometimes that's an illusion that we buy into, that just because we're meeting together and talking about something, we're getting things done.
Right.
Not really. And I've been guilty of this too, without, walking into a meeting without a clear focus, without a clear purpose. And then you come away and an hour or two later and you're thinking, I think we have to have another meeting. And I feel like at that point, I've not been a good steward of others' time. I've not loved my neighbor as myself. And so that commandment there informs so many other ways that we hopefully develop a respectful, productive workplace culture.
Yeah. And when we talk about the glory of God, that can be sort of abstract in my job. How can I glorify God? It can be difficult to think about, but if I think in terms of I can glorify God by loving other people, then that gives me the impetus. Now I know what I need to do. I need to go out and express love to the people that I'm to serve in my business, whether that's running meetings or whether that's serving customers or whether that's writing articles. As I do good for them, as I think selflessly toward what benefits them, I am bringing glory to God.
Well, Tim touched on this when he was talking about productivity, saying that some of it is in what you say no to. Now, Chris, you've already hinted at your leadership role there and talking about day-to-day of when we meet and respecting other people's time. How, as a leader in a Christian organization, how does that idea of productivity play out for you? I'm particularly thinking of, the times where you have to say no, because Ligonier is doing a lot of things and has a global footprint. How do you go about strategically making those decisions about what Ligonier is doing and what the team here is involved with and what we're saying no to?
I think it comes back to understanding that defining your mission and your purpose has to be one of the most important discussions an organization has as a family, as a church, as a regular corporation, or even a nonprofit parachurch ministry, such as Ligonier. And there are so many different things that we can be involved in. You're right. But the reality is there are only specific things that we're called to do, both as individuals in accountability to the Lord, but then also in following a particular charter. Thankfully, we draw on a decades worth of a vision that Dr. Sproul has given to us here at Ligonier Ministries. And he's been involved in this question of productivity and leadership much longer than all of us. And it's been something that he's been keenly interested to help that inform who Ligonier is and what we will be on into the future. He tells a story of some years ago, I think this might have been late 70s. They're working on organizational structure and the ministry is growing and things are happening, right? And a consultant comes in and asks Dr. Sproul, so what is it that the world needs to know? And Dr. Sproul said, well, that's easy. The world needs to know who God is. And then the consultant says, okay, great. Now, you also speak to the church and serving the church. What is it that the church needs to know? And Dr. Sproul said, well, that's also easy. The church needs to know who God is. And so seeing just that opportunity to crystallize the message of what Ligonier would be about allowed us to have now a decade's worth of fuel in the tank to keep us moving forward. We are not the church. We have no aspirations to be the church. We are called to produce resources to help disciples of Jesus Christ live faithfully. We're an equipping ministry. And so whether that's publishing or broadcasting or educational endeavors through conferences or even what we try and do at Reformation Bible College, all of that is designed to be obedient to the Great Commission insofar as we are serving the church in creating and equipping disciples. Probably not creating is the right word. Equipping effective and faithful disciples, teaching them and helping them to be biblically informed, theologically astute. Dr. Sproul has another great kind of vision that he puts out there. He wants to see the culture flooded with knowledgeable and articulate Christians. Well, that's a mission that all of us in the church can get on board with. And we remember who we are, and we remember our particular calling, but we also respect what others are called to do. And we don't go down that path. And that has to come through just that frequent understanding and centering ourselves on what Christ has given to us as individuals, what he's called us to do as Christians, but also in terms of just the importance of the ministry of the local church and coming alongside of the local church to support and strengthen her and to be able to create effective resources that equip Christians well.
You mentioned that Dr. Sproul's written on productivity and spoken on productivity, Chris. Perhaps you could just share some of those early strategic decisions that Dr. Sproul made early in his ministry to be efficient and effective with his time.
Obviously, he's a prolific author, has written over 100 books, and there's more in the pipeline still to come. And he shared this with the staff a while ago when we asked him, what were some of these tips and tricks? And as an author, he had this little system where if he knew that he had a book that had 85,000 words, that was his target book length for this, he broke that down into the number of pages that would be. And then he broke that down into the number of pages would go into each chapter. And then he would define his work in terms of how many pages he could write each day. And so he knew that if he was going to reach his deadline of 85,000 words, he had to accomplish so many words per day, given all of his other responsibilities as a man, as a husband, as a father, as a teacher in the seminary, occasional preacher in churches, leading this organization. But he knew that he had to accomplish a goal. And so he just broke the large task down into smaller tasks. And I think that is a really helpful way to think about work. There's another saying out there that, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So he would actually write up to his word count, and then he would go a little bit more, but he would never finish the next sentence that he was writing. He would leave it incomplete, and that's how he would kind of game his mind into understanding where he needed to pick up writing the next day. So he would stop mid-stride so that the next day he could come back to that same spot, finish that sentence, and then just the little gray cells kept the words flowing. It was neat.
I like what you say about knowing your vision, knowing your mission, however you want to frame it, because there's so many good things any of us can do, so many good opportunities that come our way. And you, Chris, would know this. There's all sorts of people who have great visions for a ministry like that. And so many of the things they bring are actually good. But you have to be willing to say no to a lot of good things. It's easy to say no to the bad stuff, right? So if someone comes and says they want Ligonier to publish a nice new version of the Quran, it's easy to say, no, we're not going to do that. That's a bad idea. But people can come with all sorts of very good ideas. It's only when you really know your mission that you can say, you know what, that's a great idea, but it's not for us because we're going in this direction, and that would just take us off course a little bit.
I have to admit that this is not just some perfect understanding that you arrive at and you always have the ability to make the right decision once you've settled this question of mission and purpose.
Right.
It's something that you have to come back to each and every day. I was just talking about this yesterday with one of our team members, and sometimes we have some tension within the staff. Should we do this? Shouldn't we do this? And I think as a leader, I want to foster some of that healthy tension. And I want to foster those types of conversations where this team thinks that we should do this, this other team thinks that's outside of our scope. And we want to still have a healthy and productive discussion. I think that there are remarkable moments of creativity and innovation that can happen in what I call sandpaper moments. Kind of when we're rubbing up against that mission and purpose of who we know we are and asking, does this fit? And I'd like to say that I've gotten it right all the time, but that's just absolutely impossible to reach that standard.
Yeah.
I think as a leader, you want to know what the next step is. You probably don't know all of the steps that need to lead to that end goal. So,
yeah, and knowing the frailty of the human heart here, and I know personally people can bring ideas my way, and I'm struggling with fear of man, and so by which I mean I want to make them happy, I want to please them. So it's very hard to say no, especially if they'll be offended by that no. But again, to have this clear vision and say, no, I can't prioritize that because I'm going this direction, I think helps address even that latent fear of man that can live within the human heart and make us do things that take us off course and end up just obscuring our mission instead of clarifying it.
I think that we have to recognize our finiteness too. And that can be, for somebody like me, that can be something I struggle with quite a lot. And wanting to do more and seeing the opportunity for really good outreaches and opportunities, and being somewhat frustrated that I can't get as much bat on the ball as I had hoped.
Yeah.
And anyways, I think a leader is asking these types of questions often related to productivity and what do I need to say no to? And I think your work in trying to focus us on this subject is very helpful. I would commend it to everybody. It's an easy, quick read, but it's also one that I think that needs to be part of our conversation within our churches and within our homes.
And Tim, this whole idea of a mission statement is not just for organizations like Ligonier, but a mission relates to all individuals, whether or not they're looking at their role in a local church, or whether parenting their children or educating their children, or whatever it might be.
Yeah. So a lot of books on productivity say that you need a life-wide mission, and everything. You have one statement that defines who you are and what you hope to accomplish in life. I've always found that a little bit of an intimidating thing, and I think the Bible really gives us that, right? If not, then Question and Answer 1 of the Westminster Shorter Catechism steps in and does it, nicely summarizes it for us. We exist to glorify God. But then if I want to think about some of my different areas of responsibility in life, so I am a husband, I think there's a lot of value in coming up with a mission that will govern, let's say, my husbanding and my fathering, and say, here is my mission here, or the work that I do, here is my mission in my work, or in my local church, here's my mission to my local church. And then week by week, I can return to those. I can read that mission and ask, did I do that last week? Am I succeeding in this mission? And then I can look into the future, the week or the months ahead, and say, how will I fulfill this mission? So I've got this great mission in my local church. I want to help people in these. I want to teach and train people as my mission in this church. Well, did I do that last week? Yes, no. How can I do that better in the weeks to come? That now gives me specific actions I can work towards, so I can actually ensure I'm carrying out my mission.
Well, for those that are watching live this afternoon, we do want to say thank you for tuning in. And we do want to let you know that you can pick up a copy of Tim's book from the Ligonier store. It's called Do More Better. And if you visit ligonier.org and just search for Do More Better, you can pick up a copy through the end of this week at 35% off the list price there if you use the coupon code Challies. So just during checkout, use the coupon Challies and you can pick up a copy of Do More Better for 35% off through the end of this week. Chris, when it comes to leadership, productivity, and trying to think from a Christian perspective, it can be very easy for us to want to elevate those kinds of tasks that we think are spiritual. And maybe we want to say that getting our Bible reading done is more important than, doing the laundry or something like that. When it comes to the scope of things that an individual can do in a day, how do we rightly think about these tasks so that we're not over-spiritualizing some and under-spiritualizing others?
I think organizing our work and our thinking about productivity needs to have a strong dose of God's sovereignty over all things, informing what we're doing and why we're doing it, and also understanding that there has to be a certain flexibility in terms of what you had hoped to do today or this week. There's a common saying in management circles that we'll tend to overestimate what we can get done in 1 year, but underestimate what we can get done in 5. So we tend to bite off more than we can chew. But I think you have to have a goal, and you have to reorient yourself to true north quite often, sometimes hourly, and understanding that you have an accountability, but you also have a responsibility to be flexible in understanding the sovereignty of God. You might have wanted to talk about a particular project with an employee that maybe didn't go so well, or that you might want to make some changes to that would cause some upheaval or redirection. But you also know that some other things are going on in their life, and now may not be the right moment to do that. So the hard-nosed, hard-charging manager who is completely spreadsheet-oriented and the bottom line is the only line, they're not going to be sensitive or aware of sometimes there is a right time to have a conversation and sometimes that there is a wrong time to have that conversation. Again, wish I could say that I've gotten that right 100 times out of 100, but we have to reorient ourselves to responding to the day-to-day and the sovereignty of God, and knowing who we are, what we're called to be and do. We can't be purely pragmatic. We need to be principle driven and let that inform our choices. As far as spiritualizing and over spiritualizing, again, I go back to that same idea that it is possible for a Christian to go to work for the same reason we go to church, to worship Jesus Christ. There is something very God glorifying in me organizing my desk at the end of the day. There can be something very God glorifying in me saying happy birthday to another employee, and that can mean the world to them. Wow, he remembered the birthday. That's great. And it's something that we have to recognize, that we are accountable stewards for every minute of the day. Every idle word will be judged. Every idle tweet will be judged. There's a vast amount of sin that must be accounted for in our own lives as leaders. And if we are not coming regularly to the sufficient atonement of Jesus Christ, I don't know how somebody without a right understanding of faith alone in Jesus Christ and his works on my behalf, I don't know how those leaders stay sane, to be honest. Only in Jesus Christ and his perfect work, his perfectly productive work, can I have any sense of hope and joy and thinking that at the end of my life, I can offer something back up to the Lord, understanding that it's all within the sufficient and perfect work of Jesus Christ.
And when we look at team members as well, we're looking at them from a Christian perspective and acknowledging that these are people made in the image of God. So as we're leading teams, they're not just means to an end or to a bottom line, but we're dealing with, in many cases, fellow Christians, but people made in the image of God. And as Tim has already said, we're called to love our neighbor as ourselves. And so, I think a leader has to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think one of the interesting ways of looking at productivity is to look at it under the banner of bringing order from chaos. And I think all of us, in really to some degree in every area of life, are bringing order from chaos. And again, that goes back to the beginning where God created the world. His first act of work, his first act of creation began in this: the earth was without form and void. So it's like God created something that was unshaped, and then over the 6 days of creation, he shaped it into all that is. Then he created humanity and put them in a garden. And here is this orderly garden, and they were to push that garden out. So it covered the entire earth, right? Again, bringing order as they went. And I think all of our work to some degree has that, it devolves to chaos when left. Your desk, you work at your desk for a day, and by the end of the day, your desk is covered in stuff, which is why Chris says there's value in organizing it at the end of the day. We have children. They're born as chaotic little beings. We need to bring order to them. We go out and share the gospel, and people come to Christ in chaos, and we have to bring spiritual order to them. So in that way, all work is the same. All work is bringing order, bringing God's order, defining this world or refining this world in the way he wants it to. So that makes all work equal in this fundamental way. And I think it's a really helpful way to look at what God has called us to do, because again, that's exactly what God himself does. What the Holy Spirit does in us every day. He brings order from our chaos.
Nathan, I want to go back to Tim, and I know we started talking about his book on productivity, but I want to say that I've appreciated Tim as a leader as well, and I've known Tim for many years now, and I've watched him walk through a few different seasons of his life. And one of the things I've noticed about him is something that I see in other leaders, good leaders, is Tim is keenly aware of authority, As he's walked through different decisions that he's had to make, he involves his elders in them. I know that he has men that he brings into his life. I know how much he leans upon his wife in working through decisions. And I see Tim work through decisions as a leader, recognizing the authority of the church, the elders that are there, but then also that sphere of counselors that he has speaking into his life. And I think good leaders are those who also are the ones who know how to be led. And so that there's a right understanding of biblical authority, going back to the Westminster Confession and the way that it explicates the fifth commandment and talking, it's not just about honoring father and mother, but it's about honoring superiors and inferiors. And Westminster is not creating some new grid. Instead, it's just recognizing what's there in the created order. There are superiors and there are inferiors, just as we are creatures and God is the creator. All authority is something that flows down from God's idea. And so a good leader is one who knows how to be led, who recognizes biblical authority, who knows how to follow biblical authority and puts themselves under biblical authority. I don't know, Tim, if it was you or somebody else who was talking to me about what's happening in Africa and kind of the explosion of Pentecostal Christianity. And maybe it was you talking to Conrad and Bewe, and they were saying, what do you make of all of these, preachers, that are just, turning out thousands and thousands of people every Sunday? And, who are these people? And he just had a very clear, indicting label that he put upon them: self-appointed. That these were self-appointed leaders. That is not biblical leadership. Good leaders are those who recognize biblical authority and are happy to come up underneath biblical authority. I happily serve underneath my ruling elder. And my family, we're just members at St. Andrew's Chapel, and we recognize that there is a stewardship for our souls, and that affects us in terms of our marriage and how we operate as parents, but it also it informs my role as a leader at Ligonier Ministries, where I'm under authority of my elders. And I would hope that they would chase me down if they ever catch wind of me going in a heterodox direction, or frankly just living a life that is not in accord with my profession as a Christian.
You've mentioned, when you've spoken about leadership before, Chris, the letters FAT, with the T standing for teachability. And I think this is what you're addressing, that, to be a good leader, you need to be teachable. You need to recognize there are those over you in authority, but also be willing to learn. Perhaps you could just expand on that FAT for us.
Yeah, this comes right out of when I was in college, in early college, and I had an opportunity to come on staff with a church here in Orlando, serving in the student ministry there. And it was a neat opportunity to serve high schoolers and to be able to do some teaching while I was finishing my college degree. But my pastor at that time, from the church that I was leaving, he sat me down and said, I just want to encourage you for the rest of your life to be fat. I was like, okay. I was a pretty scrawny teenager at the time. So, okay, what does that mean? He said, faithful, available, and teachable. And I've carried that with me ever since then. And so that's one thing I would say to other leaders. Just don't discount the little things that you might think could be a throwaway instruction to a young person. It could be a keel on the bottom of their ship that guides them the rest of their life. But being faithful, and I think about faithfulness in accord with what God has revealed in his word. Ultimately, that is the standard by which all things are measured. So it's faithfulness to the Lord, faithfulness to our calling as disciples of Jesus Christ. Also being available, which kind of hints at what I was talking about earlier there with that idea of flexibility. Having that availability, not being so hard-nosed and thinking, I know this is the way this has to go. Well, being available to recognizing changing circumstances, changing people, all under the scope of God's sovereignty is something that we need to have within us. That availability to, sometimes circumstances change and things aren't always the way that you think that they are. There was a German military general back in the 19th century that he said, no battle plan survives contact with the enemy. I think that's just a great way to think about how we make our plans and how can we be available to sometimes the changing situations on the ground. And again, teachability, faithfulness, availability, teachability, having the humility to not be wise in your own eyes as a leader, I think is something that must be there if we're going to end our race well.
Tim, how do we go about setting goals when we're trying to be productive? Keeping in mind what Chris has said about being flexible, but when it comes to goal setting, how do we do that in a God-honoring way?
Yeah, I think what we often do with goals is we set them on an emergency basis. We get convicted or something bad happens and we begin to set goals in that moment. Far better, I think, to have deliberate times, maybe once a week or maybe once a year, but just at some point to step away, to approach it prayerfully and deliberately and perhaps with counselors and just arrive at a few goals. I do it generally on about a weekly basis. I'll try and step back and sort of get that high overview of my life and look down at some of my areas of responsibility and say, what kind of goals do I need to set? What sorts of actions do I need to take? If I've got these missions that I want to fulfill, here's my goal in this area of life, then what can I do to further that in the week ahead? And I've got some helpful language there from C.J. Mahaney, who just said, how can I serve and how can I surprise in the week ahead? So he uses that language of serving and surprising. And if you can serve and surprise in the week ahead, you'll be fulfilling your God-given responsibility. So serving is asking, what do I need to do to carry out the obligations of my task of parenting or of writing or of being a church member? What are my obligations? What will I do for that? But then there's also that, what do I get to do? How can I surprise? How can I just express delight in the people God calls me to serve? What can I do that would be pleasing to them? And I think if you do both that, I'll fulfill my responsibility, sure, but I'm also going to delight in this area. I think if you can bring the balance of both of those, you'll be well on your way to making sure, yeah, you're doing the right thing, but you're also finding true joy in it and expressing joy in the areas God's given you to do. There's nothing we get to do just out of misery. There's nothing we get to do grudgingly. We have to do all that God gives us with joy.
So what happened?
We're called to do that, but just the reality is just that's not going to happen because we're sinners and we grumble and complain like anybody else.
Right.
I was going to say, what happens when Chris sends me an email and assigns me a task on a Monday morning, and I do it begrudgingly and not with a good attitude? Am I doing a good work or not at that point, Tim?
You're just speaking hypothetically, of course.
Hypothetically, of course.
Well, who knows, right? God knows our hearts, and God redeems even our sinful actions. And we sometimes think about motives. What were my motives in doing that? Sometimes we know my motive was poor, and then we need to repent. Sometimes we know our motive was good, and so we can thank God for sanctifying us. Most of the time, we just don't know. And I think we just carry on then. What is the next good thing? What is the next right thing I can do? But I don't think we should spend a ton of time getting hung up on our motives of whether, did I really do this out of 100% pure motives? I say just continue to submit your life, submit your life to the Lord. Continue to do all things as much as you can to His glory and trust that God is forgiving you, that He has forgiven you for all that you've done wrong. And that he delights to bring good things to those He loves, and He delights to bring it through the ones He loves.
He is at work in us and through us to accomplish His good pleasure.
Yeah.
Tim, I want to ask you, when you look at your goals and setting your goals, and you touch it on this a little bit in your book as well. We live obviously in an intense media ecology evolution right now, and there's new things hitting us all of the time, and we're going to be seeing virtual assistants popping up with a lot of artificial intelligence over the next decade, and that's going to infiltrate our homes.
Absolutely.
And it's going to infiltrate our workplaces. It's going to infiltrate our vehicles when we're driving or not driving in some cases.
Yep.
And so I want to hear your thoughts on the importance of cultivating boredom.
Yeah, so I don't like the word boredom, but I do think there's something about downtime or something about not always having a little glowing rectangle in your face at all times, right? So I think boredom to me just indicates idleness. We don't ever want to be idle in the sense of we're doing nothing, we're accomplishing nothing, we've got nothing good running through our minds. I mean, that's idleness. But there's definitely downtime, and there's definitely time where we've broken away from media. And it is funny now to look at restaurants or to look at lines at the grocery store or cars at stoplights. As soon as we stop, we need a screen. We need something in front of our eyes, something to distract us, give us something to think about. But what we ought to be doing is filling our minds with truth and using those downtimes to just let our minds go. And I deliberately, when I'm driving in the car, try to have nothing going, no radio, no podcasts. And that's just thinking time. I'll sometimes talk aloud and just hear myself work through ideas. And it can be very, very helpful to just let your mind get away from the constant influx of media. So I couldn't be bored if I tried. I've just got too much going on. But certainly those downtimes where there's nothing coming at me, so I can just take what I've got and consolidate it and see what other ideas come out of it, or life applications or ways of helping others. I think that's a brilliant thing that we've really, really lost in this always-on world.
I like this little series that David Murray's been doing on digital detox.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important question we need to be asking. Do we need to detox, and do we need to be careful, particularly even as parents, in terms of what kind of screen time we're putting in front of the kids, recognizing that allowing them unstructured time can sometimes breed very creative, innovative moments even for them. And so Philippians 4, thinking about that which is good and true and beautiful. We're told what to be setting our minds upon. And so again, coming back to what would the Bible have me do with my time when it's unstructured? That's a good question.
Yeah, and then part of the trick is that our children might, out of their boredom, go on the computer and do something very, very good and creative and helpful. They might do some programming, or they might do some creative writing. I've gotten my kids, I don't want to say gotten them in trouble before, but all right, it's time to turn off your computer. But they're actually reading the Bible on their computer. So this device, it was easier with books. It was a Bible, and all it could be was a Bible. It was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and all it could be was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. We had a pretty good sense of what was happening. Now that same glowing rectangle does it all. It does 100% of it. And so we're never sure what they're doing when they're staring at that thing. It could be something very good. It could be something very bad. It could be something very productive. It could be something very wasteful. We just don't know. And so it's training ourselves to use this same device to do different things, which is, I think, a very difficult challenge.
What do you think when I walk in and I see Nathan Bingham keep watching cat videos on YouTube?
Yeah, well, that's what he does, right? He's got to keep up.
They're kangaroo videos for us Aussies. So we're bringing up technology. Tim, is technology the answer to all of our productivity woes?
Yeah, the funny thing is, when technology causes a problem, we tend to look to technology to fix the problem, right? And so a lot of our current issues with productivity have definitely been caused, or at least been carried through technology. So much of the distraction is technological distraction. So what do? We create apps, or we create other things other technologies that will hopefully address that. But the answer is always the human heart, right? We are distracted because we want to be distracted. That's the first thing we need to admit about ourselves. We like distraction. We don't want to work hard. We don't want to work with a single-minded focus on that one task. We want our cat videos because they take our minds off of it. And to some degree, I think it's just plain warfare. We've got a good task to do, and there's all these other things that can keep us from doing it. So technology can be dangerous to productivity. Technology can be remarkably helpful to productivity. We just have to be very, very careful that we're not setting our hearts, that we're not expecting technology to fix an issue of the heart. If it's a heart issue, we need to address it spiritually, not with an app. Apps can be helpful, but they're not going to address the heart.
Do you have any particular tools or apps or things that you use, Tim, when it comes to productivity that you'd care to mention to those watching?
Yeah, there's an interesting new app. I think it's still just in beta, and there's several like this, but it's called Timely. And all it does is it runs in the background and it tracks what you're doing at your computer through the course of a day. And it's relatively new, and there's been others like it. I think this one is just working better than most. Very, very helpful for exposing what you're actually doing when you're online, versus just you use the computer 8 hours. Well, here's how much time you spent in your writing app and how much time you spent on Facebook. I think that's very, very helpful data. There's some other good tools. I think sometimes we have to realize that we lack self-control, and so we can say outsource that self-control to apps that will just block Facebook through the course of the day or other distracting sites. And then there's some wonderful apps that can help us with our tasks and to-dos. Apps like Todoist, which is a wonderful app for just storing our projects and storing our deliverables, storing our to-do items, and then bringing them to our attention at the right moment. So technology has given us some really, really helpful ways of enhancing our productivity, becoming more productive.
I know that my wife and I got shocked when we got new phones at the beginning of this year, and we thought we were having some battery issues. And on an iPhone, you can go and look at your battery usage, and it tells you what apps are sort of draining the battery. And when we both saw the percentage next to Facebook and realized how much of the battery we had used that day on just being on Facebook was rather alarming.
Yeah.
But was helpful to give a gauge to go, you know what? We need to bring this down and put it in a greater perspective in what we're actually doing through the day. This is not a Facebook device. It's meant to be a far more productive device than just that.
Right. Yeah.
Tim, I still haven't found an app that improves upon this to-do list tool.
It's still very, very good at what it does, right?
If you notice, it has a nice eraser on it, and it's pretty well used.
Yeah.
And I have my daily schedule printed out on a piece of paper, and then I just make notes, and then I'll carry them over, and then we'll drop them into the note app if it's a task I need to be doing, or if I'm away from my desk, I'll drop it into the notes app here and just kind of keep an ongoing hygiene of that list. I love having different information streams too, as a leader, but just as anybody who wants to be aware of the context in which we're doing our work. I love the app that's the Reader app, and they spell it REEDER. And I'm a huge fan of RSS. Not a lot of people use it, but I think we would all love to pull down RSS feeds in terms of consuming our information. You don't see the ads and all the other things that can be so distracting. But it makes my reading of news or Christian blogs, or one of the first things I'm looking for in the morning when I open that app. Nathan, what am I going to say? A la carte.
Mm-hmm.
What hit Tim's a la carte today? And I like it, and I can get done with that in 15 seconds and move on to something else. And I also admit to being a bit of a Wall Street Journal app junkie. They've done a good job with that, particularly on the iPad. So I really enjoy that particular news expression.
So Chris, before we sort of wrap up our conversation this afternoon, I'm just wondering maybe if you could distill for us, because we've done a good job of this, I think, when it comes to productivity. But as a leader, what does success look like?
As a leader, I think you have to have the ability to see something before it is actually in existence. And so there's a visualizing component about this. Jim Collins talks about having, that big, hairy, audacious goal. I think of, okay, what does that look like in church history? And I think a great example is John Knox. One of his famous prayers is, "Give me Scotland or I die." He had a vision for what he wanted his life to be in terms of claiming Scotland for the kingdom of Christ, for the flourishing of the Reformation, for the ordering of the church, and for the benefit of God's people there, the elect that he was going to call to himself. And Knox had just an expansive vision for what he had hoped his ministry would be able to see. And he worked tirelessly, worked himself to death to that end. Was he a perfect leader? Absolutely not. But he had a vision, and he pursued that vision of seeing Scotland brought under the reign of Christ and seeing knees bowed to Jesus Christ as Lord and as Savior. And I think as a leader, success looks like a right understanding of what that end state should be. Right now at home, we just got into a new house last summer, and I'm fighting with the irrigation system right now. And I don't know a thing about irrigation. I'm not handy like some people are handy. I do enjoy kind of getting dirty, that kind of work, when I have time to do it. So success for me is going to look like learning about irrigation and figuring out how to do it before the scorching summer heat lands upon my lawn and I'm left with dirt everywhere. So my vision is to complete that irrigation project before the summer heat comes. And of course, here in Florida, that means in about 2 weeks. But in all seriousness, you have to think in terms of Hebrews 11. There was a vision given to Abraham. He left a land that was not his for a home that God had promised to him. And Hebrews 11 recounts for us the reality that there are many of God's servants who were obedient to follow a vision of what success would be. And yet Hebrews tells us that these all died without actually having received the thing promised. And then chapter 12 goes on to tell us Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Success is what Jesus Christ is doing in this world, to subdue all things to himself. And let that be the goal that informs how we structure our years, our months, our weeks, our days, our hours, our seconds. And let that inform a multitude of projects and do them productively unto that end for the glory of Jesus Christ. That is what success looks like. Jesus Christ at work, enthroned as King over all of creation.
Thank you, Chris. And I appreciate your example of leadership, and so appreciate your time this afternoon.
Thanks, Nathan. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Yeah, Tim, we as the Ligonier staff here had the privilege of having you come and even teach some of the content from your book to some of the staff, and those watching live here may not know, but that was recorded and was turned into a course on Ligonier Connect. And so if you're watching live, be sure after the interview to go to ligonier.org/connect and do a search for Do More Better. and you can actually go through a course with Tim and see this exclusive video content, excerpts from his book, and study this in more detail. But if you do just want to pick up a copy of the book, as I said earlier in the interview, it is available from the Ligonier.org store. Search for Do More Better at Ligonier.org and use the coupon code Challies for 35% off the list price there. Well, I'm Nathan W. Bingham, and may you continue to grow in your knowledge of God and His holiness.